okay, fine. There's debate about immigration policy. That's perfectly fine. That's not what's going on in that ad. This view, fundamentally, is everywhere in the Republican Party, among the fringe and the establishment alike. And again, honestly, it's the view that animated the January 6th insurrection. The racist idea that fake Americans, the wrong Americans, not real Americans, those Americans, the usurpers, the invaders, the replacers, have taken what's rightfully ours. It used to be a view that at least publicly was relegated to fringe message boards and right-wing talk radio. Not quite something a member of the establishment in good standing could just stand up and espouse publicly. But it is now increasingly the dominant view. And inevitably, violence flows from that. When people's hearts are so twisted by racism and hatred and the paranoid obsession their country is being stolen, taken away, well, what do I do? They begin to justify violence, murder, radicalized terror is the only solution. And again, to be clear, I don't think anyone I just mentioned is intentionally inciting violence or mass murder. That's not really the point, because even if the violence doesn't happen, even if this weekend had not borne witness to mass murder in a grocery store the shooter traveled to because of the black people there, even if that had not happened, it is still the case that this vile zero-sum view of American life, so popular right now, ascendant in one of our two major party coalitions, is completely poisonous and incompatible with the vision of a country that we all share together. Jelani Cobb has covered the connections between mass shootings and white supremacy extensively as a staff writer for The New Yorker. He's also the newly appointed dean of the Columbia University School of Journalism, and he joins me now. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
You and I think we were on the streets of Charleston together.
That's right.
Talking to you in Charleston. And I have read your writing on this. This is what you wrote. This is after El Paso in 2019. I just want to read this. The alleged El Paso shooter's screed bears resemblance to Trump's rhetoric, particularly in the martial description of undocumented people as an invasion. In the immediate conversation, the aftermath of El Paso has tended towards the accessibility of weapons of war in civilian life. The word invasion becomes even more telling. We are not, the killers seem to be telling us, living in peacetime, and the AK-47 is a tool created to address enemy invasions. The sense of existential peril is once again at the core here.
It is, and it's astounding on multiple levels. You know, for one, we've just seen this kind of right-wing attack on the 1619 Project. But if there's anything that can be taken from that, it's the fact that Black people have been in this country since 1619, since before it was actually a country. And so the idea that somehow, you know, African Americans are party to replacing anyone is ironic. Now, if we're going to be realistic about this, the population of this country is about between 1% and 2% Native American. They were 100% of the population of North America at the time of contact. If there's anyone that has a language about replacement, it is in fact what white Europeans did to the indigenous population of these lands. That's the great replacement that we have to grapple with in the history of this country. And the final kind of point of this is that the rhetoric is being used to gin people up just to the cusp of these kinds of actions. But not even plausible deniability now. It's implausible deniability, just a fig leaf that people present, knowing full well there's no way we can say at this point that we don't know that there is a relationship between this kind of inflammatory, incendiary rhetoric and the actions that we're seeing manifest again and again and again and again.
Yeah, I wonder too, like, your read on this sort of rhetorical trajectory, because I always want to check myself as I am now 43 years old and I've been covering politics for 20 years, and always this tendency of like, in my day, you know, and obviously there's, you know, tremendous amounts of intensely racialized, you know, scapegoating that happened, you know, the crack baby stuff, Willie Horton, right? It does, though, feel to me like there has been some set of taboos that were erected, where it was like our consensus view of the American project, at least in what we espouse, is that it is a creedal nation, multi-ethnic and pluralistic. that even that feels directly under assault by one of the two major parties and its rhetorical forces in a way it didn't before. And I wonder if you feel that way too.
I do, but I also think, going back to Derek Bell, who's been castigated, he was the legal scholar whose thinking is behind critical race theory. He always argued that that kind of consensus was a product of the Cold War, that the United States was simply embarrassed in the world stage to have these kinds of knuckle-dragging racists using rhetoric that could then be turned against the United States and foreign relations. And absent any kind of credible concern about international opinion, there's really no reason that you can't indulge the kind of horrific, terrible, inflammatory language that was a staple of American life in the 1950s and before.
We also have, increasingly, I think, just this sort of sense of you're always one skip throw away from these sort of extremely fringe figures in mainstream politics. Wendy Rogers, who's an actual state senator in Arizona, and I think notoriously probably the most sort of extremist right-wing fringe elected official in America, I think it would be fair to say. She immediately posted on Gab calling it a false flag, essentially insinuating that Fed boy summer has started in Buffalo. There's always this, you saw this with January 6th, there's also this very strange reaction of, when the violence or event comes that flows from your ideology, that it must be staged.
Right. Yeah, there's that too. And then it leads down, the path of even more increasingly untenable arguments. I mean, we saw that in Sandy Hook. We've seen that in multiple other instances where, it just verges on the point of absolute lunacy. But that hasn't stopped anything. We have seen the rhetoric around January 6th go from outrage. I mean, if we just look at Kevin McCarthy, the privately voiced concern versus the public, defense nearly, or at least downplaying of the gravity of what was happening. And the problem that I think that this gets to is the fundamental lack of concern about self-preservation. And I don't mean this in the sort of like white racial paranoia sense. I mean in the sense of democracy. Democracy at its strongest is still a fragile system. And if you erode support for this by even saying that your opponents are illegitimate, what you do is erode support in the system that makes it possible to have a peaceful civil society at all. So I say all this to say that these are extremely dangerous points, and that the racism, if you don't care about black people, if you don't care about anti-Semitism, if you don't care about Latinos, fine. But just understand that the biggest war in this country, 720,000 people died over the question of who belongs. If you don't care about anyone else, recognize that the volatility of this language can come back and negatively impact your life too.
That's a really important point, Jelani Cobb. It's wonderful to have you here. Congratulations on the new gig. I wish we were talking about something less awful, but it's great to see you in person.
Thank you.
Up next.